Hi, my name's Steve Kinney, and this is a course on enterprise UI development. I created this course so teams can work more effectively on large apps. In this course, we'll cover how to architect your code base and how to keep it maintainable over the long term. We'll cover everything from monoliths to microfrontends to monorepos. We'll look at how to use Turborepo to speed up your builds. We'll investigate best practices for CI/CD pipelines, and we'll look at strategies for tackling that migration to a new architecture that makes your team more productive and makes it easier to ship features to your customers. Go architect a code base that everyone on your team can contribute to effectively, even your AI buddies.
So we won't look at this terminal unless something crashes and I'm panicking. The goal is to never look at this terminal again, so don't worry about it too much. The only thing I want you to kind of notice as I start this up is I'm effectively starting up two servers, right? Would I like to develop this code base? I have two development servers, one for my shell and one for my one remote, right? That's another thing to think about in these more complicated architectures, which is what's your development setup going to be like? Are you going to use the other team's modules that are in production, staging, development? But what if you all need to develop something together? How does that work if you're pointed against their production versions or their staging versions, right? Again, thinking about like, how would I spin this up in development? Like, we have two apps. And the group of us could riff on all sorts of different fun ways of like, well, maybe like whatever's on main for all of them, we pull them down. Maybe they're running on a shared infrastructure on the VPN. Like, yeah, again, the complexity autonomy, welcome to it. And like, I'm not going to go into what your VPN at your company looks like because each and every one of you has a different nightmare to live through in terms of corporate VPNs. Or other infrastructure or something along those lines. Or if you don't, just wait until your company gets more successful and you will. When they start hiring security folks for very important reasons, everything will get harder. Cool. So we've got basically two parts of this app, which are we've got this host and these remote analytics. And it feels like my app is at localhost 3000. And it looks like my app is at localhost 3000, but that's kind of a lie. I mean, it's not really a lie. I'm at localhost 3000 and there is a application running there, but it's really, if we go into the network, running effectively two places. As you can see, this is kind of like one of our little sub apps, which is the dashboard. And then we've got kind of the version with the side panel. So really, this is kind of our host app surrounding our one federated module in this case. And on one hand, other than like one responsive design thing I didn't think about because I put my developer tools down there before, it works. There are some things to notice though. We saw the multiple ports. We can also see that the application shell is pretty sure we're logged in, right? Logged in, air quotes. And yet the remote thinks that we're not logged in, right? Because on one hand, the advantage here is that all of our pieces are isolated. On the other hand, the problem is all of our pieces are isolated. Right, and I will like spoil the problem, which is y'all like the context API most of the time, right? Because you don't turn on the thing where it shows you when things re-render, so you like it because it makes state management seem easy. Yeah, that works for a React tree, but you've now broken your app up into multiple React trees. So you don't get a context API anymore. I mean, you do for each React tree, right? And so again, more autonomy, more problems. That's new content. That was not a joke that I had prepared. So, live jokes, live coding. That's what we sign up for around here. When I do turbo run build, it depends on, all of the packages being built first. For the outputs, which is where it's going to try to look for, like, what am I hashing here, right? in that case, it's going to look in the dist directory for all of them. So you do need to have some alignment. If you have one package that's building to a build directory and another one that's building to a dist directory, you could add more options here, but I would argue stop that. Right, fix that. That's like a 5-second fix. Just go fix it. Type check will go ahead and type check all of them. This is like world's simplest version. And like having read all the docs top to bottom, there's not much more than this, right? One of the best things about teaching these courses is like, I kind of use the tool every day, but I'm like, I'm going to talk to people about it. I should read the entirety of the docs. I can tell you there's not that much more here. And, linting will, it'll run that across all of them, so on and so forth. But then the interesting one is, again, like for unit tests, obviously run the unit tests. But like, let's say hypothetically that the testing we're doing in this workshop was playwright tests. And let's say you wanted to like build the preview app. You wanted to like build all the assets, fire up the app, and then go do it. So like testing will go ahead and rely on everything being built first. Again, in that same dependency graph. Linting, we don't necessarily care, right? Like, and so on and so forth. So like type check will make sure we run all the individual type checks first, and then we'll figure that all out. Testing, we do want to build everything first. And then dev is the interesting one, which is like, don't do anything here. You know what I mean? Like, don't cache my dev server, please. You know what I mean? It's going to stay running, so don't like wait for the dev server to finish ever, because it's going to like start up. Like the dev server is the one interesting one because it's not necessarily part of your build chain. It is, you're just saying basically like, do not wait on this, do not cache it, effectively ignore it. We're going to run npx turbo run build. Great, and you can kind of see all of my different, the dashboards build script and the users build script and the analytics build script and the legacy apps build script. And so I went ahead and it built all of them. And that took 5.316 seconds. Now, assuming that I haven't messed anything up, because again, didn't even look at my notes. Oh, look at that. It didn't rebuild anything, right? Because it built everything, it cached all of those things, and now this one took 2.93 milliseconds, right? Now imagine we had playwright tests, right? Because like, you're like, great, 5 seconds, like honestly, who cares? Playwright tests, right? The idea that, to your question from earlier, right? Like, you can now only run the stuff that actually changed, right? And like, that's incredibly powerful. And again, when we set up the remote caching, like if Evan ran it and nothing has changed, like, and then you run it, you won't even have to run it. You know what I mean? Because it's like nothing has changed since the last time, thereby we don't have to run it. And so then CI/CD runs like that. If you had a pre-commit hook and anyone ran it for the things that have, like if you were working on one slice, and where this is more important is that team topology, right? Which is now your team is not slowed down by the existence of tests from another team, right? Because ideally, right, like if you didn't touch their code and they've ever run the tests, last time they touched their code, you don't have to run their tests. A pattern you'll see a lot is, maybe at the root of the directory, you might see like a tsconfig.base.json, right? This is like very similar to when we saw the catalogs with PnPM workspaces, right? Where, hey, here's gonna be like the shared configuration, right? We're all gonna target, because eventually, like if you're doing the thing of a build time situation, like you're probably targeting one, probably is not the right word. You are targeting one runtime, right? You're either, targeting, depending on what your company needs support in terms of browsers, right? Or if you're targeting Node or what have you, right? And so these are the things you're kind of like sharing across all of them. And then in your individual packages, you're saying like extends, and yes, you have to do the dots here. Sorry, I don't make the rules. But like now, like at the top of the repo, we have the base, tsconfig.base.json, and then each smaller slice is extending that with like
okay, like, and a lot of times I might not have anything in compiler options, but like I was working on this one project a few months ago. It was, I think I mentioned this yesterday, it was a Chrome extension where the types that I needed for each kind of like slice of the application were different, right? Service workers don't have access to the DOM. They have access to worker like APIs. They had full access to the Chrome API. The content script, which is what runs in the browser, has access to only 2 pieces of the Chrome API, but it has the DOM. And then the side panel has both the entire DOM and the entire Chrome API, right? And so like I needed at least 3 tsconfig files, but I could basically say like, and I was targeting a modern Chrome, so like in the base was like, we're targeting like ES, I think I was doing ES next, but like whatever, ES 2022, it'll change. And then for each one, I could say like what libraries or like what things we include, like whether or not this one supports JSX, so on and so forth, right? You can extend that base config. And so you're kind of keeping the parts that matter shared across the entire like set of teams. And then like for your particular like slice of it, you know, if you need to have, you know, what files you want to include or disclude, so on and so forth, right? Like, you know, you might have a thing where there are some JSON files that you're only displaying and you don't want them part of the type check, so on and so forth. You can like add those to exclude and figure that out as you go. And yeah, then you can also pull in the references of like what are the other, you know, if you are then depending on like the shared package or the UI package, saying like, we're also going to pull in that and we'll pull in its tsconfig file. Those will be built incrementally, right? And so you start to like just break it apart into smaller pieces so that TypeScript does not start losing its mind. And then like the other thing to do is, and this is now for package.json, is since you have Turborepo and Turborepo could build the assets, like if you're using Vite to pull everything in, or using Bun or something that can read TypeScript files, you don't necessarily need to build everything, right? But if it's like, hey, the host application is running regular JavaScript or something along those lines, or for instance, like when I was working on the Chrome extension, those need to be JavaScript at the end of the day. Or if you use SvelteKit, the plugins that you pull into a SvelteKit configuration have to be JavaScript. They can't be TypeScript, right? And so you could theoretically build all of your assets, which is also neat because like stuff like Bun's bundler will build one file, right? And you can externalize a few things, but you can like say like even for your build system, like each team is gonna have one built asset that then gets pulled into the shell. Is usually a lot easier. You got to play some games like tree shaking and in case stuff is shared, but we can figure that out. But you could also just build the types. And now TypeScript is not reading all of the code, and you're just using the kind of built-in stuff where if you are publishing a package to npm and you would like to have TypeScript support, you can have this types exports, and then when someone installs your package from npm, they would get the types. This now, same thing works inside your monorepo, right? Because each one has its own package.json. You're effectively, when we saw that like workspace stuff, you're effectively pulling it in as an npm package, really. Yeah, they all live in the same repo, and they can all kind of like easily share types. You don't have to like publish and pull down. You're basically making a very easy way to like isolate the different pieces as if you were publishing to npm and then installing them from npm without publishing them to npm and installing them from npm, because that's tedious.